Hey guys, Chris Fix here, and today I'm going to show you how to replace struts in your car or truck. In this case, we're working on a 2006 Mazda 3, but changing out the struts in most vehicles is very similar to this, so if you follow along in this video, you'll be able to change the struts in your car or truck. Now real quick, before we go and change out this old strut with a nice new strut, how do you know when your struts are bad and when they need to be changed? Struts are basically one of these shock absorbers with a spring coiled around them as one unit. And the important thing to know is this style strut is called a McPherson strut, and it actually acts as your upper control arm. So it's super important for your suspension and how it handles, and also just the safety of everyday driving. Now, you should inspect your struts at about 50,000 miles, and there are 4 quick ways to know if your struts are bad and need to be replaced. And they are, if you're driving and your car feels unsettled and you're bouncing around, almost like driving on a trampoline, which is the problem with this car. If the struts are leaking any oil at all, if the struts are physically damaged, like if they're bent, or if they're rusted to the point that they're no longer safe, and if you drive the car and it's a harsh ride and your car's just sitting too low and bottoming out. So those are the 4 main ways to tell if your strut's bad, and we know our strut's bad here. You always replace in pairs. So with that information, let's change out the struts, and here are all the tools you'll need. This job is very simple, and we're using all common hand tools: pry bars, hammers, screwdrivers, ratchets and wrenches, torque wrench, breaker bar, and we also want to make sure that we're using penetrating fluid, and that's what I'm going to do right now because we want to get a lot of penetrating fluid on here so things come off easily. We're going to be separating this strut from the knuckle right here, so get a ton of penetrating fluid on there. There's also a nut up here which we'll be removing, which holds the sway bar end link to the strut, so soak that with penetrating fluid. And then there's another bolt back here that we're going to be removing, so get some penetrating fluid on that. And also, if you want, you could add the penetrating fluid a day before you do the job so it soaks in there and works even better. Now that we're done soaking these bolts, we'll let it sit for a few minutes and then we'll start removing the strut. So the first thing we're going to remove is this brake line right here that connects to the strut. And to do that, you just use a flathead screwdriver and pop it right off. And you always want to make your job as easy as possible, so work with the vehicle. So let's turn the wheel so we have more access to this side. And look how much easier it is now to get to that brake line so we could remove it. To remove the brake line, use a flathead screwdriver, and you're going to pop this clip out just like that. And then the brake line should pop right off. With our brake line unhooked from the strut, since we're on this side, let's remove the pinch bolt that's holding the base of the strut into the knuckle. In this case, the bolt is 17 millimeters, and you want to make sure you use a breaker bar so you can break this bolt free. And once that bolt's broken free, we could use our regular ratchet and loosen it the rest of the way. And there we go, that bolt's out. Alright, so with our brake line removed and our bolt down there removed, we have one more bolt to remove down here, and it's for the sway bar end link right up here. So let's turn our steering wheel so we have easy access to it. And you can see how much easier it is to get to that sway bar end link bolt right there. Now typically with these bolts, what you have to do is you have to get a wrench around the actual bolt, and this is a 14 millimeter, and then you have to use one of these torques right in the middle here. And awesome. Typically the stud strips on the inside because it gets all rusted, but this nut broke free and it's coming loose. If it does happen to strip, I'll show you a tip in a couple of seconds on how to get it off. So now this stud might be at such an angle that you can't easily pop it out. Instead of hitting a hammer against the stud, we're going to jack up the suspension real quick. And you can see as the suspension gets jacked up, that stud is straightening out, and now it'll slide right out just like that. Now this sway bar end link came out a lot easier than it normally does. Usually the stud gets all rusty and the inside gets stripped and you can't loosen it easily. So what you're going to want to do is you want to grab a vice grips, and you can see that there's this little metal piece right in the back here. It's right before the rubber. You don't want to grab the rubber with the vice grips because then you'll tear it and you'll need new sway bar end links. But what you want to do is you want to get your vice grips and clamp them down just like that, and then you'll be able to get the nut off just by turning the nut because the vice grip is going to be holding this stud in place. It's also a lot easier if you have an impact gun. Use the vice grip, impact it right out. And you might even consider switching these out right now because you have everything apart and they're cheap enough. Alright, so we have everything removed. So now we're going to take our hammer and we're going to hit the knuckle downwards so that we separate the knuckle from the strut. But we don't want to break this clip right here. This is for your ABS. So I suggest removing that, getting that out of the way. And that just prevents you from hitting it with the hammer, just in case you miss. And you just want to hammer away until you see the strut start separating from the knuckle. Just like that. And keep going until it separates completely. Perfect. Now the knuckle and the strut are separated. So we're going to go up top and loosen the 3 bolts at the strut tower. Now these bolts should come off pretty easily, but if not, you could use a breaker bar. And that's 1, 2. And on this last bolt, it's kind of hard to get a good angle on here because we have this weather stripping in the way. So you might have to use a wrench like this so you can get to this bolt. And that's the last bolt, so let's remove the strut. And with a little wiggle, the strut comes right out. Although we already removed the bolts, I want to share a top tip. On this strut tower, these bolts are set in place. They're not adjustable. But on some strut towers, these bolts could actually be moved around to adjust the camber on your strut. So if you get new struts, you can get close to your old alignment by marking the bolts with one of these markers. And just trace around the bolts so you outline them. That way, after you remove the bolts, you can see exactly where they need to go when you put the new strut back in. So a little top tip like this will help you get your alignment pretty close. Now before we put in the new strut, I always like to compare parts, so get the old strut and compare it to the new strut. You want to make sure that there's the same amount of bolt holes. You can see here the sway bar end link mount is in the same spot, and then the brake clip mount is in the same spot. And then when I got this strut, I thought it was damaged because it looks like there's a little indentation right here, but then if you look at the old one, it has the same indentation, so that's good. And that's why you always compare the old strut to the new strut, and now we could go and install our new strut. Before installing our brand new strut, there's one thing I want to do. I want to make sure that we clean out where the strut and the knuckle meet. All you have to do is get a metal wire brush, and we're going to clean right inside here so that any dirt and debris doesn't get stuck between the strut and the knuckle. And you could even use a little bit of brake clean to clean that out, and then use a paper towel to clean it all up. And now we could install it. When you're installing the new strut, angle the top in first, then bring the bottom part of the strut to meet the knuckle. And when you have your strut in place like that, we're going to come to the top here, and instead of using the bolts that we removed, the struts come with brand new bolts with the washers. And if we take a look at our original bolt, you can see that there's Loctite right on the threads here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some Loctite and put it on the threads of the new bolts that we're installing. So now you want to align the strut so you can get the bolts in, and you just want to hand tighten all 3 of them, only a couple of turns. So all 3 of these bolts are in place holding the strut in, but they're still really loose. So now we could go down to our strut, and before we push the strut into the knuckle, we want to make sure this back piece here is aligned. This metal piece right here, which the bolt goes through to hold the strut in place, has to slide right in between this little gap in the knuckle. So that looks like it's pretty well aligned. And now we can jack up the knuckle. Watch your fingers, but push the strut to align it in the knuckle as you jack it up. And keep on jacking it up until it's all the way in. And you'll know when it's all the way in by looking at the bolt hole in the back. And if it's clear to slide your bolt through, then it's all the way in. So now we're going to go slide our bolt in to hold the knuckle and the strut in place. But before we do that, clean the bolt with a metal wire brush. And you can see there was some Loctite on here. So again, we're going to add some Loctite. Now we'll just slide the bolt in place and tighten it up. Now we'll grab our ratchet and we'll tighten it down as much as we can. And then we're going to grab our torque wrench. And this bolt gets torqued down to 65 foot-pounds. Alright, with our strut in place, tightened down to the knuckle, that bolt's all torqued up, we're going to go put in our sway bar end link. Just simply pop it into place. Don't forget your ABS wire bracket and tighten it down until it's snug. Then torque it down to 40 foot-pounds. And with that in place, you don't want to forget to connect your ABS. Now we have one last thing that we have to do here, and that's to get this brake line and pop it into place. And take the brake line clip and lightly tap that in. Alright, we are almost done. Everything down here is done. So now we just need to lower the suspension and remove the jack, and then we'll tighten down our bolts up here. And now I'm going to just tighten all these down with the ratchet. And it's a little tough to get the ratchet into this last one, so I'm just going to use a wrench. And now that all of them are tightened, let's torque them down to 25 foot-pounds. That's 1, 2, let's see if I can get the socket in here, and that's 3. Beautiful. And we are done. That's how you replace a strut in your car or truck. Now check out this before and after. Here's the before with the old struts, and it's easy to bounce around and it feels like you're driving on a trampoline. And here's the after with the new struts, and the car's a lot harder to bounce and it feels way more controlled and less bouncy while driving. What a difference. Remember, you want to replace struts in pairs, so make sure you do the other side as well. And this job really is that easy. As always, hopefully the video was helpful, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing for new how-to videos every week. Up on the screen are going to be a couple of related videos. To get to those videos, you can click on the screen or find the links in the description below. Also in the description are links to any tools or products I used in this video.